Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another in the series of Curating Culture. I am Georgette McGlashan Miller, your host and research fellow at the African-Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank. Today, we have with us our own director, Dr. Kirt Henry, who will be presenting on the theme Creativity as Political Thought and Action in Afro-Jamaican Religions. As we know, Dr. Henry is a practitioner and an academic who conducts research in revival dress, and today he'll be sharing some of his thesis with us. I trust you will be edified and enriched with the information, and please note all your questions in our live on YouTube, and you can also send them to us in other ways that you may know. Thank you for being with us today. Dr. Henry, over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. It's my pleasure to be here to present a section of my study, which I hope to develop further for my manuscript, which I hope to be published very soon. Now, the topic that I'll be sharing or engaging you and the audience online with this afternoon is creativity as political thought and action in Afro-Jamaican religions. And this topic is quite important because disciplines such as cultural studies, which I'm grounded in, does not concern itself enough with the business of the sacred. And to now engage this conversation where we talk about creativity as a process in Afro-Caribbean religions is quite important in furthering that literature. Now, there are two primary objectives that I want to achieve today. One, to examine the politics of protest within the creative ethos of African-Jamaican religions. And two, to understand the spirit as an active agent of protest in African-Jamaican religions. Now, there are some guiding questions that I've been engaging with in talking about and completing this research. The first of which is, how has creativity been used by practitioners of Afro-Jamaican religions in the construction of their cultural and spiritual identities? Two, of what significance are creativity and spirituality to notions of liberation in post-colonial Jamaica? Three, how can creativity and the sacred be used to further conversations of decolonial studies in the Caribbean? Now, spirituality and creativity it's an interesting topic in the diaspora, especially across African-Jamaican religions. And you have Voodoo in Haiti, Santeria in Cuba, Candomblé in Brazil, and so on. And Clinton Hutton has done quite a bit of study on the process of creativity in invoking the spirit within those religions. But I want to point out, before I go any further, that I'll be focusing on Afro-Jamaican religions, particularly revivalism, and making reference to other religious practices, such as Kumina in Jamaica and so on. Now, in this research, I've also been exploring the idea of sacred assemblages. Assemblages meaning various emblems and artifacts assembled to convey meaning and to be activated during worship. So we're talking about dress, we're talking about the seals within worship spaces of African-derived religions. We're also talking about altars and how those as multisensory arrangements can be used to drive notions such as protest and politics and liberation. How is it that practitioners within African-derived religions or African-Jamaican religions actually engage with these emblems or assemblages to then convey meanings or political meanings, if you will? Now, Performative assemblages is another theoretical concept that I've been thinking about in terms of talking about creativity as protest. And this is the work of Susan O'Donovan out of her architectural studies, looking at buildings and how buildings, the construction and deconstruction of buildings within society. Now, O'Donovan talks about bricolage, which is the gathering and assembling of various artifacts to create something new. And in that act of creating, there's that element of performance, which is quite important when you talk about these African derived religions and creativity. Now, it's interesting that reading through the literature, the various sources that speak to creativity and the sacred, especially coming out of West Africa, and as you know, the Egungun masquerade, especially in West Africa, creativity is quite essential. For example, you create a costume, and once you begin to perform that costume, the wearer then takes on the identity of that particular ancestor or god within the space. So it's those kinds of conversations that we're having here in the Caribbean or in the New World, if you will. Now, revivalism, as you know, is an African Christian religion, and there are elements of Christianity even in Kumina. For example, with reading of the scriptures in certain rituals is concerned. Now, Genesis 1:26 to 27 says, man was created in the image and likeness of God. Now, in the process of imaging God, human beings then assume God's attributes, one of which is God's aesthetic awareness and inventiveness to create and to become. And becoming is quite important because scholars like Stuart Hall talks about identity as not only a matter of being who you are presently, but who you are becoming. And this is my point of departure in this particular research. Who are Afro-Jamaican religious practitioners becoming in places and spaces of worship? What sort of identity are they then taking on to themselves? And how is it that those identity sort of embody an anti-colonial rhetoric, which is quite important in our movement towards or furthering the decolonization project here in Jamaica? Now, the foundation of creativity, and as I said before, I'm looking at creativity as a process of imagination. So I will be talking about the creative imagination quite a lot. Now, the foundation of creativity in Afro-Jamaican religions is the spirit. The spirit is the foundation of what we create and how we create it. And I say we, the inclusive term, because as you've mentioned, I am a revivalist as well. Now, in this process of creating, dreams and visions become important because dreams and visions are the media through which the spirit then communicates with you as a practitioner. Now, during spirit possession, or getting in the spirit, if you will, within these worship spaces, it is believed that the spirit is lodged in the head, right? And that is also the philosophical belief within West African religions, and that is why you have a lot of West African sculptures where the head is huge in comparison to the body, because the head is that seat of imagination and where the spirit lives. Contrary to Western philosophical thought, where they talk about empiricism, and objectivity, where it is believed that knowledge in its entirety is and the mind is separate from the spirit. That is not the case in African-derived religions, especially here in Jamaica. Knowledge and the spirit goes in tandem. The spirit is the
The
source
knowledge
of
source.
knowledge. It's the knowledge source from which you then create and imagine and image God, and image God in your process of creation, right? Wedenoja, in his dissertation, talks about the mind as a space in which the spirit directly communicates and convey messages. Now, Rob Pope, for example, postulated that human powers of creation are tinged or tainted within a divine aura. So these sacred assemblages, such as I mentioned before, the dressing, the altars and the seals, these assemblages then are created and assembled to give a sort or a level of divine aura. And you can be immersed in that divine aura once you step into the sacred spaces, and so on. Now, there's an ecological relationship between the divine and artistic creativity that is often revealed through the arrangement and performance of dress, seals, and altars. Creativity and the sacred do not exist as dichotomous categories, but are seen as intertwined. And as I mentioned before, unlike Western philosophical thought would distinguish the spirit and the mind. Now, importantly, these scholars have also talked about creativity in terms of its spirituality and in terms of the process of being and becoming. Buckingham, for example, says that creativity is a process of liberation and authentic self-definition and a spiritual process to listen to our inner knowing. What is that inner knowing? That inner knowing and believing is, in fact, the spirit. Because when Jamaican people say, for example, my mind tell me, say, right? African-derived religions, in other words, we say the spirit within me, who lives within me, is saying these things, right? Now, Richard Keenry defines the creative imagination, which is the seat of power, as the human power to convert absence into presence, actuality into possibility, what is into something other than it is. And that is the heart of the politics that I'm dealing with here. The power of the mind, which is intertwined with the spirit, to create something that is into something other than it is. So we're talking about difference now and how the aesthetics or performance aesthetics of these African-derived religions are the foundation of difference within our society. And it is that politics of difference that then becomes anti-colonial in the larger scheme of things. And the power of creativity as well to then turn the absence into present. And if you notice that these African-derived religions are really in the business of recreating and representing identities and images that were otherwise marginalized in slavery and so on. So that in and of itself is the basis and foundation of politics. The power or the poiesis, right, to manifest and create something that at its heart is anti-colonial. And especially because we're living in a post-colonial society. I'll share another quote with you from Pope. Pope says that creativity is more than mere consciousness raising. It is the radical refashioning of consciousness. And that sentence really resonates with me. The radical refashioning of consciousness. So politics and power within African-derived religion is not a matter of the spirit just telling you what to do, but it comes with a level of awareness, and it comes with a level of consciousness, and that consciousness then empowers you to define yourself outside of what is considered norm and outside of the usual standards of society. And by society, I mean Western society, right? And we're a traditional society. And of course, we're governed by the rules and traditions and norms of the mother country, so to speak. She continues by saying, creative practice involves a grappling deep within the self and one's relations with others, an attempt to wrest from the complexities and contradictions we have all internalized. And that is another power of engaging spirituality and going back to roots, if you will, in terms of your spiritual practices, because in doing that, it sort of grounds you as who you are as a descendant of Africa, then operating within a space that is laced with colonialism. So that is one of the powerful messages coming out of Pope's work. The importance of creativity and spirituality in reminding you of who you are in the process of becoming. And that is also the heart of what I am getting at in this work. How can we continuously engage spirituality in this process of becoming and in this process of knowing who we are as a people, as Jamaican people? Now, there are elements of the creative process in the sacred. And these elements, I believe, you're seeing on your screen. At its core is the spirit, as I've mentioned before. In African-Jamaican religions, there's nothing that is done under the sun without it being informed by the spirit. If not directly by the spirit, there's a level of spirit consciousness within which you operate. So for example, if a robe in revival is not given directly by the spirit, you then know that that robe must be consecrated to then perform within the space, right? Secondary to the spirit is the creative imagination, which as well works in tandem with the spirit. And of course, in creativity, your individual taste become important in all of this, right? And there are other religious influences that are taken into account in creating. So for example, in revivalism, there are what is called nations, right? For example, there is the Indian nation, there's the Chinese nation. No, there's a recent development. There's also the River Nation, which is dedicated to what we call the River Muma, which is a water deity coming out of West Africa. So those other religious influences are syncretized into the creation of who we are as a people. The level of social network, now in creating an altar, for example, or creating a dress, or in assembling a seals, yes, the social network is important because you are then traveling and being socialized within the space. So you then take influences from each other in creating these elements. Interestingly, the internet is another source of creativity in Afro-Jamaican religions. And this is one of the stronger points that came out in my study, in that especially the youth population within African-Jamaican religions are using the internet widely to then refashion themselves. So what you will find is that, for example, young black Jamaicans are using the internet to explore and to look at authentic and original African clothing, to then recreate that in the worship spaces in Jamaica. So that's one of the interesting phenomenon that came out of this study. The process by which youth are using the internet to embody and inform their spirituality. Now let's go deeper in creativity as political thought and action. Now there are Jamaican aphorisms that I've been using. There are certain Jamaican aphorisms that I've been using to inform the theoretical underpinning of this work. For example, and in talking about especially creativity. So the first one is, what's spoiled on
Style.
What's spoiled on style. In Jamaican Standard English, you say what is spoiled becomes a style, right? The next one, take your hand, make fashion.
Yes.
Or in other words, use your hands to make fashion. When trouble take you, pick me short,
Fit you.
fit you. Right. So when trouble comes to you, a child's shirt will fit you. And these aphorisms that we use in our everyday lives as Jamaicans are important because they speak to our innovativeness as a people in using things from our environment to create and recreate, right? To represent and represent self in society, especially in a post-colonial society that has been teaching us for years that otherness and difference, should be relegated or marginalized, right? So these aphorisms, are important to our creative process, the ways in which we are, in essence, creative geniuses in using lack, in using the limited resources in our society to then inform our identity.
Using memory as well.
No, there are certain, the academic in me, of course, Mrs. Miller, will not allow me to continue without acknowledging certain sources or avatars within Caribbean culture. So the first of which is Clinton Hunt. He has been doing a lot of work on the creative ethos and the performance aesthetics within voodoo, within candomblé, within revival, of course, and his work is quite instrumental in the shaping of this chapter. Barry Shevans is another important scholar, and he talks about the open-ended creative imagination where we as a people are not limited by boundaries, but there's a kind on a level of boundarylessness and flow in how we create and express our spirituality within this space. And that notion of open-ended imagination is quite important. Steve Buckridge, in his book, The Language of Dress, talks about the kind of innovation and creativity that enslaved women in particular employed to fashion themselves on and off the plantation. My favorite one, Rex Nettleford, he talks about the battle for space. Now, where is this battle for space? Where are we battling as a people? And my theoretical approach to this battle for space is that we battle within the mindscape. Also, our battles are on the bodies as black people operating within everyday life. So those battles are in the mind and the body. How do we fashion ourselves? What are informing our methods or the methods that we employ to fashion ourselves as a set of people, as descendants of enslaved Africans, right? And that battle for space is quite important. Now, James Scott's work is another important work in this body in this study, and he talks about the idea of transcripts, both the public transcript and the hidden transcript in his work Domination and the Arts of Resistance. And Scott essentially talks about the idea that the public transcript are the things that we are free to do, the type of clothing that we are free to wear, and especially in within apparatuses of the state, like the church, the school, the courthouses, and so on. But then the hidden transcript now are the things that we think about as a people, and that manifests itself in the way that we express, for example, folklore, in the ways that we generate our stories. Louise Bennett talks about the peeled drunkrow sitting on the treetop. Who was the peeled drunkrow, right? The way in which we code our language, the way in which we resist by reinterpreting certain codes of the public transcript. So that, for Scott, is the hidden transcript, those off-stage and backstage discourse that we engage with as a people. What are the things that we say and we do behind the back of Bakra Master? After we've ended on the plantation and we are back in our huts or what have you, what are the sort of conversations that we have with each other that the plantation master cannot hear? So those are the hidden transcripts that that Scott talks about, and I'm quite excited by this. But Houghton, Clinton Houghton, of course, added another dimension to it, where he talks about the unhidden transcript. And that is what I'm interested in. The things that we can see, the clothing, the seals, the altars that now occupy public spaces. So gone are the days when slaves used to only congregate in nocturnal gatherings. Only nights are available for you to congregate. But in the post-colonial era of the Jamaican society, African-Jamaican religions like Kumina and Revival are now occupying prominent spaces, and doing so with a kind of elegance, and doing so with a kind of autonomy. So in other words, even though they are still marginalized to some extent, based on the dominant code and the public transcript, they still exhibit a kind of power, which is important. So it's in a sense, and I'm going to cultural studies now, is manifesting and performing power from the margins. But even though they're performing power from the margins, they are still effective in terms of their visibility. And that is the business of cultural studies as well, in giving visibility to groups that would have been otherwise marginalized, in giving voice to a group that would have been otherwise voiceless in the grand scheme of things. And that is quite important in what we do as academics, what we do as scholars, in advocating for these sort of traditional religions and African-derived religions in society. Now here, this slide goes a bit further in talking about the hidden transcript. But what I really want to show in the interest of time is this diagram. And I've generated this diagram based on the readings of James Scott and Clinton Houghton. And to the left of this screen that you're looking at, you will see the box. And in that box, you have the British standards, which is the public transcript. So those dominant hegemonic ideals or ideologies. You must look this particular way going to church or work or school. You must look this particular way in your daily operation. So those are the hegemonic that we really can't get away from because they're already structured and entrenched in society. But then you have the hidden transcript as I said before, which is the offstage and backstage discourse. And how is it that the things that are unseen are informing and influencing those hidden transcripts? And what are those things that are unseen? Our creative imagination, how we think and how we process as a people. And also the spirit, the ancestral spirits, if you will, whom we cannot see and whom we cannot touch. So those are the hidden transcripts working behind the scenes to ensure that this kind of anti-colonial discourse goes forward in our daily manifestation and expression as a people. Yeah? So it's that kind of warrior metaphor that Hutton talks about, and that warrior metaphor that is still existent in Kumina. You see it through the dance, you see it through the type of dressing. Even in Revival, it's quite prominent, you know, the wearing of certain military clothing, like the sash and the pips and the epaulets and the lanyard, the use of certain terminologies like captain and shepherd and so on. Those are all informing the hidden transcript, which are quite important. And of course, the unhidden transcript, which would have formed a kind of anti-hegemonic ideology, which is also what I am interested in. The things we see informing a kind of anti-colonial rhetoric as we continue this business of even reparations, as we continue this business of decolonization or furthering that project, because decolonization, as far as I'm concerned, is a project that is ongoing. It's an ongoing project, right? And of course, Pope, there's a quote here that I am quite interested in as well. So Pope says, there is a ceaseless conflict between two opposing notions of the aesthetic. What are those two opposing notions? The public transcript along with the unhidden transcript. And when those two combine, of course you're going to have conflict. Of course you're going to have tension, because one is infiltrating the space of the other, right? So Pope continued by saying, one figuring as an image of emancipation, the other ratifying domination. As far as I'm concerned, as a practitioner and a scholar of African-derived religion, the image of emancipation, and I'm saying emancipation because emancipation is the closest, in my estimation, is the closest to which we can go as a people in returning to who we were. That for me is emancipation, reclaiming the level of autonomy, reclaiming the identity of who we were as a people. And that is why, of course, in Rastafari, you have terms such as emperor and empress. In Revival, you have metaphors of royalty, where they address each other as king and queen, prince and princess. And even in Kumina, there is a king and a queen. So we still engage with these spiritualities, if you will, as that source to return, as that source to embark on a journey of reclaiming identity. And that in and of itself is important to me as I continue my work as a scholar. Now, on the screen, there are some photographs. There are a few photographs. Pardon me, I'm having some technical challenges here.
Well, while you sort out the technical challenges for the photographs, this is more than a mouthful. I am interested to see what the questions look like. There should be many, especially about the spirit, you know, whose spirit, the whose mind, you know, how does the spirit and the mind come together? I know I have a few questions myself. My concern, mainly, what I hear coming out the most is
Protest.
rebellion, as I said before. And, you know, protest in the sense of, I was thinking about the dress, but now when you base everything to the foundation of the spirit, then it tells you that nothing is created without the influence from somewhere else. So when you say that, you know, Jamaicans say, my mind tell me, it causes me to question now, the mind, then the spirit, the mind intertwine, then is it my creativity or is everything always influenced outside of me? In the West, before you answer, you said that there's a separation between the spirit and the mind.
And the mind.
Right, but in the East, the spirit and the mind are one.
Are one.
So by the spirit, are we saying the mind is the spirit or that God and man is one? If we're looking at the spirit as a God spirit.
Right. So let me go back to the original scripture that I quoted,
1:26.
Genesis, if you will, that we are made in the image and likeness of God. And certain religions would state that in the process of imaging God, we then become gods. Right? So therefore, the mind and the spirit cannot be separate in that regard.
Right.
Because if we are in the image and likeness of God and we then image God, we then occupy the mental and spiritual faculties of God.
So the notion of man is a spirit has been pushed to man is a God. Okay.
Correct. Right?
Want to understand that. Do we have questions from the audience or should I continue? We're going to take a look at the photos now? Not quite. If not, I have a lot of things.
Sure.
So we spoke about the creativity and creativity as a form of bringing the absent into the present.
Into the present.
And the way how we represent and how we redefine then what is in the present by bringing the absence into present. But what we're really bringing present is ourselves.
Yes, bringing forward the self. And in the process of bringing forward that self, you then carry the remnants of who you are. And you use that, of course, to inform even who you are.
Yeah.
As an individual, as a group of people. And that is quite important in the process of becoming. Yes.
So revival then, through dress, and this is me trying to work it out in my mind and hopefully the audience understands it this way as well. So revival then, through dress, is bringing, through the creativity, is bringing into the present the memory of who we were originally as a people. And you're saying that emancipation is the closest we could come to this, because through refashioning ourselves, we are bringing back ourselves to take up some space that we were deprived of as African people. Is that one way to say it?
That is, but there's also, so in this conversation, we have to keep in mind the importance of memory. The importance of memory. And also the damages that were done to identity on the plantation system. And the unfortunate situation where our foreparents were ripped from their lands, and some of us have never been to Africa. So how do we then reinterpret, or rather, how then do we interpret Africa within our spaces? And that is where memory becomes important, because we then inform identity in the process of refashioning. We then take the things that we do remember, and in that process then use that as the basis to inform or refashioning of self within a post-emancipation, within a post-independent society. And of course, one of my arguments is that the spirit, as the carrier of that ancestral memory or lineage, assists in informing all of that refashioning that takes place. And importantly, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that especially youth now are using the internet.
I wanted to talk about
the
that.
internet, right?
Not the internet, but just media on a whole.
Media,
Yeah.
right. In terms of using that to inform their spirituality and how they express.
Well, now that you're talking about the internet and media and fashion, the photos are ready. So we can go through the photos, then we take the question from the audience.
Right. So this first photo you're looking at is a photo taken of a revival leader within a table ceremony. And you mentioned earlier that metaphor of royalty, where you become the king you were previously, not only in the physical, but also in the spiritual. And it is the spirit that informs that kind of metaphor. And it's interesting, and I'm going in another direction here. It's interesting how reclaiming self and operating or performing this metaphor of royalty contributes to a kind of healing, which then allow us to cope and deal with the traumas of slavery.
And you see, now you said that, and you're talking about dress and clothing. It reminds me of this Errol Hill, I think that wrote the Theban plays,
Right.
And there was a scene where the son put on the father's jacket because the father died, and in a sense took on the persona of the father. So in this creativity of dress, where you fashion yourself by putting on, say for example, your shirt, things that are non-colonial, closer to Africa, you put on your past, bring yourself into your present, presenting your people and yourself at the same time. So dress does this, but we don't think of it like that, because sometimes it is our everyday lives. For example, dancehall, that is my area. So you keep talking about the royalty, the kings and the queens. It's the same thing in dancehall, same thing in Rastafari, kings and queens. It's a reclamation of self, but it's not understood as that. So even though the garment is a lot less in fabric, the theme of royalty, the theme of a better self than what you have in this post-colonial society is what is being created then for that time, and that is taking up space. And if we can use this term, it is taking up loud space.
It's taking up loud space. That is true. That is correct. And if we begin to look at dress as a second skin to our already black skin, then we then realize the seriousness of really interrogating the business of dress and dressing bodies within society, and what sort of information one can get from reading the clothes that we wear. So this photo goes back to that metaphor of royalty within the spiritual space. Now I talk about visibility, and you're looking at this photo and you will see black bodies, people of African descent, performing an Indian heritage. And that is one of the arguments in my coming out of my work of revival as that liberatory religious practice that give visibility and voice to otherwise marginalized groups. Because the East Indians came here as contractor laborers. They too faced colonialism. They too were under the shackles of colonialism. The Chinese came here to a lesser degree, but the very same. They too faced white supremacy, racism, shadism, colonialism, and all of that. And here, you see black bodies within ritual spaces, spirit and spirituality, giving visibility and identity to an otherwise marginalized group within society. Now, the other photo that you're looking at is a photo that I took during my fieldwork in Montego Bay during a Kumina ceremony. And it is just amazing how things such as, and in this case, talcum powder, is used to give visibility and identity to the spirit that is then performing within the space. And that's the whole process. So what this person did under the influence of the spirit was to apply talcum powder as well as the blood of the slain animal to then manifest that divine aura. And these are the products of creativity and the creative process within African-Jamaican religious practices, and also the importance of that. I spoke about the metaphor, the military metaphor, or the warrior metaphor. The photo to the right was taken by Clinton Hutton. The photo to the left was taken by me during a revival ceremony. And in these African-derived religious practices, of course, the metaphor of not only royalty, but also the warrior metaphor keeps coming out. And in the work of Clinton Hutton, he talks about revivalists and Kumina, practitioners of these religions, being involved in the Morant Bay Rebellion of 1865. And so the ancestors of these enslaved Africans continue to carry these kind of messages and codes in their everyday life through how they dress and also how they perform their being in everyday society. Of course, the table is regarded as a sacred art, if you will. And it takes a level of creativity, which is then informed by the spirit. And you're looking at an elaborate revival table, right? And it takes a level of creativity and creative imagination to assemble or put together this, what I term as this level of spiritual assemblage. And these are the level of creativity. Also, there are grounds in the revival religion that are creatively assembled to embody and manifest spirit. And what you're looking at presently is a pool that is dedicated to River Muma, or Mami Water, if you will. And there's a kind of creative genius and artistry that is then applied to the creation of these sacred spaces. So you see an image of River Muma on the floor of the pool, as well as the painting and drawing of various marine life within the pool as well, to signify that oceanic aura, to signify or recreate that space or home where River Muma then can come far removed from the rivers and the seas. But this now is a recreation of the ocean or the river where that particular deity dwells. Finally, what you're looking at is another brilliant piece of art or creative manifestation. And this as well is being guided by the spirit. This is an Indian order, right? In the revival faith. And as opposed to the high table that you just saw on your screen, this is called or referred to as a ground table, used to invoke and entertain the Indian ancestors or Indian messengers, if you will, in the space. And there's a similar image that I want to bring your attention to. And this is an image coming out of which country? Haiti. Haiti, right? And this is the brilliant and carefully orchestrated design of a veve. And a veve, of course, in Haitian voodoo is used to channel the lower or channel the deities or the spirits, if you will. So it takes art to manifest the spirit. And of course, in that manifesting, the spirit is then guiding you in terms of what to do and how to do it. So it is then pleasing to the spirit, who will then represent himself within the space. That is the kind of ecological or symbiotic relationship between man, mind, and spirit. Is that the spirit guides you into what to do. So when he or she presents itself, it is then pleased with the creation. You understand? So the importance of creativity within this space as well.
Okay, so I have 3 questions here now. The first one from David Brown says, how do we define creativity for the context of this presentation? And I think you've said it a couple of times, but just to be respectful.
That's an interesting question. Yeah. So creativity is that process of imagination where the mind, the spirit, and the practitioner are intertwined in producing the outcome of a creative design, per se. And I stress the interdependence of the spirit and the mind, because as I mentioned before, Western philosophy will teach you, philosophers like Immanuel Kant and others will teach you to some extent that the spirit is completely separate from the mind, where in African-derived religions, the mind is the seat of the spirit, and it informs our everyday lives.
So the next question from Taloa Adodo, how does this creativity help us to reinforce/create African-based identity, affirming social and political institution in Jamaica?
Repeat that question.
How does this creativity reinforce or create African-based identity, affirming social and political institutions in Jamaica?
All right. So it is that level of creativity that allows us to have within contemporary society a revival church, which is inherently African as well. It is that creativity and ongoing processes of creativity that allow us to have Kumina. Because you then may ask, apart from this scholarship, what is informing these continuous creative processes? What is the source of these creative processes? And how those are then used to inform various institutions within societies. So that is quite important in terms of the ancestral memory and how we continue to reinforce knowledge through our means of creating and through our various creations as a people. And these creations are then used to reinforce and reclaim our African past as a people. I'll give an example. Imogene Queenie Kennedy, which is the godmother of my godfather. You will hear the story of her, where she fell in a trance under a cotton tree, and the spirit then takes her back to Africa. For I believe over a month or so, she was in trance. The spirit takes her back to Africa and then teach her the Kikongo language, which she's able to, when she got up, she's able to teach that language and to sing songs in that language. And that is the kind of not only ancestral memory, but that is the power of the spirit in informing or reminding us of who we are as a people and bringing back particular things to our memory, things that have long been erased, right, from our memory. In the revival faith and in Kumina, young people, some of them may ask the question, but I am doing this. How do I know what to do?
You also mentioned
See?
dreams and visions. In this context,
Dreams
talk
and
about
visions are also quite important in teaching or the media through which the spirit communicates with these practitioners through dreams and visions.
Another question is, in revivalism, you mentioned about the River Nation, and we spoke about the River Muma. This person is asking if you heard about the bird spirit and the fish spirit. Could you say if there are any other non-human spirits?
Right. Forgive me, but the anthropological term is slipping me. Not pantheon, it's anthropomorph. I'll come back to that. But there's a term that is used to describe the kind of animal-like spirits that are present in these religions. So in revival, you have the fish spirit, which is River Muma, the goddess of love and fertility and wealth and so on.
Oh, so it's the same thing, just by a different name.
Just by a different name. So River Muma is also present in Santeria as Oshun. And she's also present in West Africa as Mamewata. And the bird spirit, of course, we have the dove.
The dove.
The dove.
Right.
So whenever that spirit manifests itself, it comes with a cooing sound. You have also the hunter, which are the dogs. So in revival, you'll find, for example, a devotee wearing a turban with both ends of the turban sticking out to represent the ears of the dog. So that person is a hunter. And of course, that person is used within the spiritual community to sniff out, if you will, things such as illnesses, persons who may not be spiritually aligned, persons who may be facing various ailments and so on in their bodies or within their family. That's the purpose of the hunter. Now, in Haitian Voodoo, you have you have Dambala, which is the serpent. And the serpent is a sacred animal. And of course, when Dambala presents itself, then you have the movement of the body with that level of fluidity in motion. Of course, when the fish spirit is present, or let me just say River Muma, give it identity. When River Muma is present, you'll find particular movements associated and sounds associated with that. For example, the feet are locked together, and the top half of the body is then allowed, if you will, to move and so on. So there are various animal-like spirits with various purposes, of course.
You didn't mention anything about the colors of the garments, since we're talking about really the dress as protest.
Right.
Tell us a little about that, because I'm not sure that they're making dresses that look like fish for River Muma, but how does your dress identify with that deity?
Let me tell you, in my research, there is.
You've seen?
There is.
Okay.
There is. Actually, those who work the River Nation in revival, the women in particular, their skirt is made
like the fishtail dress.
Like the fishtail dress.
Okay.
That you will see in Little Mermaid and
Little
so on.
Mermaid.
And ball gowns.
Yeah.
Right? So they're made with a straight coming down, forgive my description, with a flare at the bottom.
Yes.
And of course that represents the River Muma. But there are also colors associated with her as well, such as gold. Gold is used to represent her. Pink is used because she's a goddess of love. Also, blue is used to represent her because she's a deity of water. And blue is used to represent water. Hunters generally wear forest green because these are spirits or deities that live in the forest.
And we see these colors in Rastafari dress.
And we see,
as well.
yes, we definitely. Because the influence of revival in Rastafari.
So the dress continues as a political stance.
Right.
So I want to play advocate now. You spoke about practices such as Kumina and Revival, taking up the public space, not hidden again. You know, I went to a Revival Time Festival and I have heard about people that would go to church in the day and then jump Revival at night and hide. So that is not happening anymore. They are now being incorporated in the public space. Could the word assimilation be used? And also, would you entertain the thought of having this in place as a way to maintain control? Like, when you are not involved with us being the traditional power holders, you are free to do whatever you want. But if we've incorporated you into our setting and into the public space, we have a kind of control over how far or how deep you can go. So coming in public or at an event becomes a kind of performance, kind of entertainment. What do you think about that?
So let me begin by saying I would be wary of using assimilation as a term, but I'd use terms such as dual membership. Because
like Clinton Hunt have a face for you,
right?
One for master and a face for me.
A face for background master and a face for who
me.
I know is me,
right? Who
right?
I know is me.
And you still have that kind of dual membership as in the 18th, 19th century coming up. I have a very good friend of mine. I'm not sure if he's online. He is Catholic, staunchly so, but he wants to take up membership in the Revival Church.
That should be an easy transition.
Because that face is who he believes he really is. But because of status, because of legitimacy, he then holds on to the Catholic tradition or the Catholic way of being. And there was once a point in our history where you could not get land unless you were a member of an established church. So you find a lot of back then revivalists becoming members. And that is why you find a lot of revival churches today. Their service starts at 1 o'clock, because that is the tradition coming down. They would go to the mainstream churches in the morning, and put them turban in their bags, you know, wear the full white, go to these churches. But when they leave in the afternoon, they put on the turban and go to a revival yard, right? And that is the kind of duality, dichotomy, if you will, that still, to a lesser degree, but that is still happening and quite functional in society. And in fairness to us, we are multicultural as a people.
Yes.
And we use multiculturalism not only as a cultural term, but also a policy term. So it's not just multicultural in terms of cultural awareness, but something that is entrenched in policy. And there are some of us who feel that they still need that kind of duality to feel that level of completeness. So you may have Catholic background, and then you may have revival or Jewish background.
Well, and revival is an Afro-Christian.
And it is an Afro-Christian. Yeah. And revival, let me say, unlike some mainstream Protestant churches, are quite inclusive. These are communities, and I don't really want to say churches, but these are bands.
This is an altar call, guys.
These are bands. These are bands or communities that welcome everyone. You have a table ceremony, visitors, persons who are not members or devotees of the faith come and they participate. As in a conversation yesterday in the Revival Church, there is really no spectator. Yeah. Because at some point in time, you are going to be pulled in,
right,
or going to be drawn into the ritual or the service that is happening.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Henry. That was more than a mouthful. I am sure our viewers appreciate that. And let me extend my thanks to you also for staying with us. And just a few announcements. It is now the new year. And the African Caribbean Institute has a slate of events that we're asking you to come online, come to the Institute. We still have the Expo Journey in Revival iconography that's up, and that will be helping to theme our February cultural program. We will still be viewing the exhibition, and we will have several events around the exhibition. First, we will be having a presentation across counties, that's all 3 counties, Cornwall, Middlesex, and Surrey, in our schools, an outreach program educating people about the role and the work of the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica. Also, for our last Sunday that is coming up, the Institute will be open for our last Sunday in January and also in February. Our last Sunday in February promises to be very big as a part of our February cultural program. Yes, we will be going further into revival dress. We will be having a sacred attire fashion show, and fashion in the sense of refashioning, not in style and fashion, but it will be very stylish. You will hear more about that if you follow us on Instagram and all our other social media pages. Also, for that, right after February, it should be a part of the February program. We're just sticking it up there in March 15. We will be having our inaugural Olive Lewin lecture that promises to be very good, very big. So we want you to just come out, and continue to support us, and email us, text us, visit us, carry your family and friends from overseas. We are welcoming, and we're looking forward to having you. So until next month, join us again for another in our series, Curating Culture, where we curate to educate. Thank you. Why are you doing this and that in the chair? Sorry. Those are the bloopers, guys.